Well, welcome one, welcome all, and good afternoon all. And here on your afternoon channel, live with Maphonga J, broadcasting from South Africa, here in Mzansi, Africa. And we are so excited this afternoon. I have a guest with me, yours truly, my friend Benson. Matinyarare. It's like they're telling us to keep quiet. Here on your afternoon channel, Maphonga J, we were discussing African politics, African science, African medicine, witchcraft, democracies, financial, economic issues, architecture, and everything else between. The whole idea of this channel is to get African people beginning to talk about African problems and finding African solutions. And I'm so excited. I just managed to get myself a big t-shirt here. Sanctions must go. Sanctions must go. And the architect of this program, and I'm excited to tell you that the people in Zimbabwe, in Europe, in parts of America are beginning to talk about sanctions must go. And with me here is the progenitor of that project himself, Mr. Benson, who's going to take us through the dangers of the problems of sanctions. What is the thought pattern when a country, a first world power, for example, is beginning to put sanctions on a third world country? I mean, imagine we are only just 12 million people in Zimbabwe, in the country, 18 million on paper and etc., plus a few outside. But a country like America with 268 million, 300 million people, has so much interest in an economy of 12 million people to an extent that you don't want to do business with them, you want to cripple them, you want to stop them, you want to stop them. Why? Maybe because you want to put your own government, you want to manage their economies. So what are sanctions exactly? Sanctions, maybe it's a process of where you suffocate a people that are in trouble already and you try to twist their arms so that they can begin to conform to the realities. So ultimately, let's agree on the onset that maybe sanctions are all about putting illegitimate governments on African people. Right. You, as the one who has money, you want to determine who must run the politics of that country. And once you can decide who runs that country, what does it mean? Is that you have power over that economy and you can manage the ins and outs of that economy. And I want us for this afternoon session to take some time with Benson. I'm not in a hurry to harass him and say, but I want him just maybe to take us through, in your own understanding, Benson, what is a sanction? When someone is saying, I'm putting you on sanction. I know you're married, you're single. Because when your wife says, I'm putting you on sanctions, what does it mean? What does it mean when you are on sanctions?
Yeah. Well, you've basically summed it up. But the thing that we're trying to get to people's understanding is that sanctions are actually weapons of war. Back in the days when they used
economic
war, but to call it economic war is to trivialize it. It is warfare.
It's proper warfare.
It's to block you from getting food. It's to put you under siege. Back in the days when they used to have war, when we used to have those forts and
yes.
and what were they called?
Come and surround the city.
Yes, they would surround the city.
Nothing inside.
Nothing comes out.
And when you're hungry, what do?
You end up having to give in. You see what I mean? And that's what sanctions are all about. They're a form of siege. And some countries actually say that sanctions are worse than war. This is why you saw the Japanese actually went for the Second World War and they attacked America at Pearl Harbor because America had blockaded Japan from getting oil, iron, any form of natural resources.
Sitting at the port.
Yes.
You can't get anything in.
They blockaded it with the Navy. And the Japanese ended up saying, would rather go to war.
Because war you can win.
At least when you have a war, you know who you are fighting.
And the enemy is
You know what you're fighting for. And you're fighting to get the release of this blockade.
Okay.
And so that is why the Japanese went to war. And eventually they lost the war, but that war...
But they won the battle.
Exactly. Because eventually they had to be opened up and they could get the food.
And right now Japan is doing very well. It's doing very well. Maybe let's just zoom in. Let's zoom in on the Mugabe regime, on the transition to the ED, Mnangagwa's regime, post the conversation of the two regimes, and how that has panned itself out. Because in my own world, you put sanctions on a country, you identify 10, 15 political top heads that are in that country, that say you cannot travel to America, you can. But who really gets hit when sanctions are in place? Who suffers? Is it the political figurehead who suffers, or it is actually the community that suffers? When your own assessment, when you are putting sanctions on a community, on a country, who are you targeting?
Well, the American sanctions are not targeting politicians as they've told us. The target of the politicians has just been a ruse. It has just been a way to placate the people and make people not see what the sanctions were all about. The American sanctions are targeted on the government of Zimbabwe. And when they are targeted on the government of Zimbabwe, they are also targeted on the institutions and the ministries of the government of Zimbabwe, which deliver services to the people. And the very first set of sanctions, which was ZIDERA, was to close Zimbabwe off from the multilateral lending institutions. After isolating Zimbabwe from
for the sake of those who are outside, what is ZIDERA?
Yeah, ZIDERA was a group of sanctions that were put to stop Mugabe from trying to take land.
Okay.
Zimbabwe had become this country that was starting to meddle with American or Western imperial interests in Africa. The very first time they did it was in Mozambique. Mozambique was under attack because of Maphonga, who were being paid by the Boer government here in South Africa. And the Boer government is
actually, on that one, let's not absolve the South African government over the death of Machel and the involvement in the Zimbabwe war. I remember as a young boy in primary school, when actually the Boers came to bomb our places, putting on polish on their faces and all. I saw them. So South African Boers have always been in Angola, Namibia, they've been involved. In Zimbabwe, they've been involved. In Mozambique, they've been involved.
In Congo,
they've been involved.
Why? Because they are the bastion for American or imperial interests in Africa.
And the South African government, by going into bed with the Boers in terms of the national parties, DA parties, and all white parties, they're actually just baptizing the same colonial muscle that gave problem to Southern Africa.
Some people are actually saying that the fight that has been there politically between Jacob Zuma and the new government now, or the new president now, has been an issue of this imperialism. Who of these leaders has got a bigger imperialist interest, or who can maintain imperialist interest in South Africa?
And that's where the money is.
And if you maintain imperial interest in South Africa, you've maintained imperial interest on the whole of Africa. And so Robert Mugabe was punished for dislodging imperialism in Mozambique, where he sent the Zimbabwean forces, and Congo.
Yeah.
My
cousin went there.
They were trying to remove Kabila, and they were trying to remove Kabila because Kabila would not give in to the interests of people like what is our man in Rwanda, Kagame. Kagame had soldiers or rebels that are still in Congo today who are serving American interests. This is why we're always questioning that, yes, Rwanda is developing, but on what are they developing?
And whose money?
On whose money are they developing?
Because the politics of politics is economics.
It's economics. and the fight that will always be in Africa it's an antagonistic fight for resources. The resources of Africa are wanted by the Western world to develop the Western world. Western industry happens for processing African resources. And that processing
of
raw
African
resources,
beneficiate it outside,
bring back the same, bring back the product.
A lot of people cannot afford it.
And Africans don't get it, that till today, this battle has never stopped.
Till tomorrow.
Until we start taking action.
Let's zoom in on the Zimbabwean sanctions.
Yes.
And the intentions of the sanctions. So we agreed that the sanctions are actually a direct interest of, for example, on this case, is the American interest.
Correct.
But America is not just America. America represents Europe.
Exactly.
It represents all the JSE stock exchange communities.
Correct.
The business community.
Correct.
Let's be blunt.
Correct.
That have industries, that have farms, that have factories,
that have
in a local country. And the country makes policies that destabilize the business of the white man.
Correct.
In an environment.
Correct.
And the white man in an environment calls Big Brother.
Correct.
Outside of the country to say, punish this guy so that I can have access to my...
I'll even put it this way. The white man in Africa is not here on his own accord.
He's been sent.
He's a representative. He still serves the kings and queens of Europe. The oaths that were taken were never broken. And that's why I actually say
don't hurry me. Don't hurry me on that one. Because we've had another argument with some friends of mine where they are saying white people are African. And on the basis of what you are saying right now, I think that throws a very interesting spanner onto the works. That if you have a white man in the country, in Africa, and his interests are totally not African.
Yes.
His interests are to protect
European interest.
The Queen of London.
The Queen of London. The royalty of Netherlands.
Of Netherlands.
The German.
And they want to double up as citizens in Africa. Have you ever heard of a black man who is called a European?
No. And this is why Africans must understand that once you understand something called an oath, these whites, when they came to Africa, took an oath in the interest and in the name of their royal families and the European nations they were serving. They never broke those oaths. Those oaths are a covenant and they last till today. This is why they don't share resources with Africans.
Because they've never made an oath.
Because they've never made an oath with the Africans. And their biggest interest is they shall maintain a comfortable level of life, a high standard of living, good jobs, to be able to administer the interests of their European
of their principal.
And when you look at America, America is not really a country in the strictest sense of the words. It's a colony in which the natives were eliminated.
It's a colony of the British.
Yes, and they killed the American Indians. 15 million of them.
Yes.
They eliminated them so that they could take over the land, and they could take over the resources. Till today,
in your professional,
American Indians are still living on reserves.
In your own professional thing, I want you maybe to give me 2-3 pointers. When you put elections into place, what exactly happens to the country that you have put on sanctions?
You see, the issue is that like now,
when
you put a nation under sanctions, what you have essentially done is you stop the government from being able to deliver for them.
Number one, no deliverance.
No deliverance.
Okay.
So you talk about free and fair elections, but you're holding the political party behind so that it cannot perform and so that it can be elected out of power when the elections come.
So firstly, you're looking at destabilizing
the ability of the running government to function.
Number two,
you want to stop the people of the nation from being able to receive services.
Okay.
So you are collectively punishing them for electing a particular government. And you're sending a message.
So you quarrel with the father, but you kill the children.
We kill the children. And we make the children understand that if you keep this father, we're going to kill you with more hunger. We're going to deprive your hospitals of medication. We're going to even deprive your private sector, your businesses.
So number three, talk to me about exports.
Then we stop your businesses from being able to access capital.
And these are not government businesses.
These are not government businesses.
These are
private sector businesses. So we deprive them of capital. We also deprive them of markets. Whenever they want to sell their products there, when they need payments, those payments are done in US dollars in international business. We throttle those payments. We delink them from partner banks or partner financial institutions across the world.
On the partner thing, let's move further, because on that one, how then are people in other countries who have interest in the country, when they want to move money into this country, how do sanctions speak to an investor who is in America, who is in Canada, who wants to bring his money to a place that has been put on quarantine?
Right. They can't bring those.
Why and how?
Because automatically the United States government's treasury will bring out a statement that says that a particular country has become a high risk. And once they have said that businesses in those countries, particularly the financial sector, have to institute a quarantine process of closing out business interests in these high-risk jurisdictions.
So America quarrels with Zimbabwe. Everyone else who has allegiance to America, for example, or Britain quarantines Zimbabwe. Anyone else who has business and interest with London, then they must follow the lead of the one
of the Americans.
The country. This is not us, the Americans, can be British, can be but whoever is the principal who is instituting the sanctions, then begins to say to all his friends, because me and Benson are no longer talking. I don't want all of you guys on my Facebook page, all of you guys on my WhatsApp calls to talk to Benson, because me and Benson are not talking.
Correct.
No one else is allowed to talk to Benson.
Correct. And remember, either you're with them or with us, that George Bush said after the start of the Gulf War or war against terrorism, is exactly the principle that is applied when it comes to these sanctions. And what is ironic is that when George Bush made that statement, this is also the time that the executive order sanctions were put on Zimbabwe after Iraq had been targeted and all these so-called terrorist states, and Zimbabwe was put there as well.
For the purposes of some people who are still learning and understanding this concept, maybe let's look at how sanctions have functioned in other countries. I'm looking at, for example, let's do a quick case study. I know we don't have all the luxury of time. Afghanistan is here, Syria is here, and I want us to look also at Croatia.
Iran.
Croatia is here. I want us to look at Russia.
Russia
is here. Libya
has
gone through.
Cuba.
And in Africa. So to be honest,
yes,
Zimbabwe has been actually a case of interesting study, because I don't remember as many countries that have been put under sanctions in the whole continent of Africa.
Absolutely.
But Zimbabwe has actually been like a case study of how much an outside European American constitution and government could have so much interest in a domestic, impoverished, poor economy, to an extent that they want to treat Zimbabwe the same way they will fight Russia and Japan.
And we also have to admit that Zimbabweans are 100% to blame for these sanctions lasting for 18 years.
Take me through that.
The Zimbabweans have not been able to accept that they're at war and they're under a siege by the biggest country in the world. They have failed to acknowledge that. They have failed to recognize that the Americans are utilizing weapons of mass destruction that happen to be economic. So the Zimbabwean system is being destroyed piecemeal. The hospital services done, finished. The education system is still standing only because it was very robust from the beginning. Infrastructure is gone.
Import, exports.
And look at what it's doing to our morality as Zimbabweans. We've got prostitutes in South Africa. Prostitutes who are coming from Zimbabwe to be the biggest prostitutes in the country because they've got no economic opportunity. And the only economic opportunity, educated. The only economic opportunity they have is to prostitute. You've got illegal immigrants coming to South Africa as refugees, crossing crocodile
immigration issues. Because of immigration issues, they don't have the right papers.
Yes.
And which market do they fall into?
But the Zimbabweans themselves don't acknowledge that the reason why they're having these problems is because of sanctions. Because they cannot see what these sanctions have done in terms of
hold it right there. I think what Mr. Matinyarare is bringing here is very, very pivotal. And I would want to echo on that when we look at sanctions as African countries, and we think that, oh, well, that's the problem of Zimbabwe, that's the problem of Congo, that's the problem of Libya, that isolation mentality gives the imperialists an opportunity to
isolate us,
to beat us one at a time.
Correct.
And as long as we don't understand that this strategy of isolating and putting a country into sanctions, for example, you put Zimbabwe into sanctions. If Botswana is a good friend of the Americans, or Zambia is a good friend of the Americans, their relationship with Zimbabwe is affected by their allegiance to their principal, who becomes American. I want us to move to the third one.
Actually, before you go, I've said to people that the presence of a military base in Botswana is exactly because of the reason why there's sanctions in Zimbabwe. The sanctions are to actually deter Zimbabwe from taking land and utilizing that land to prosper itself, utilizing its resources to prosper itself, but it's also a message to South Africa that if you choose to economically transform rapidly,
let's speak like Christians,
to disobey the master. We are going to punish you, and if we punish you economically, we also have the option to utilize the military that is sitting in Botswana.
I was speaking in layman's language. When you punish a government, you are putting the common people into a tension.
It's called collective punishment.
And then the common people will revolt against their own government. And the one who has put you on sanctions says, I was not involved. It is the local people
100%
who are not happy with your services. So you get out of the parliament.
100%.
But for me, this is the tricky part. Because the same economies that are putting African countries into sanctions are the same countries that are involved in putting illegitimate governments into the same power spaces.
But we can't keep blaming the Americans. Our own governments continue to use a democratic system of governance that does not work for them. Our own governments do not want to address the structural issues that were left by colonialism, which include the control of the factors of production. Our own governments do not want to unite, as Kwame Nkrumah warned them, that if you do not unite, you shall be isolated and you'll be destroyed. You'll never have capacity to industrialize or capacity to have the military might to defend yourselves. So they can't blame anybody.
I think what we are landing onto here, which message you want to send to the entire African continent, is that war
and the diaspora.
War is no longer just about people going to combat and shooting each other on the military base. War now is moving into economics. War is moving into technology. This technological war, where software and information is being used to manage the people, propaganda right now because of internet access. We have access to speaking to the whole of you around the world and etc. And if this information and if this space of speech and communication is not well managed and it can be manipulated, then you can send the correct or the informed propaganda to the people and manipulate them. I want us to move to number 3 or number 4. I don't know where I am now.
Yeah.
We've talked about economics. We've talked about trade and industry. We've spoken about the educational systems. We've talked about the JSEs and etc. And we are moving again into the issue of grants.
Right. No, before we go into grants, I want to talk about the issue of licensing.
Licensing. What is that?
This thing of licensing is that no products can be sold from any American, British, or European companies to any other company in the world, or no parts for any machinery can be sold even to the Chinese companies that manufacture machinery without a licensing agreement. And this licensing agreement signs sometimes what is called an agreement not to pass on or non-disclosure agreement.
Let's make it a primitive one. You have a non-disclosure that you cannot do this business without me.
Now, what non-transfer also says, you cannot sell your product, your finished product, to any other country
except me,
unless
I agree.
I have agreed that the licensing agreement agrees that you can sell my product, your product, to Zimbabwe, which has got my product in it. So now when you buy machinery from China, a lot of people have said, if the United States doesn't want to do business with Zimbabwe,
let's go to China.
Why don't you do business with China?
You can't.
What they don't understand is that Chinese machines have got American IP, they've got American
You cannot
parts,
send those
they've got
machineries.
European parts, and China cannot sell those parts to Zimbabwe if it does not have a license.
And Zimbabwe does not meet the requirements.
And Zimbabwe is too small. China is not going to break any of its relationships with China or Europe. I mean, with Europe or America, just so that they can do business with Zimbabwe.
Let's move over to the last section of the presentation, which are solutions.
Right.
How do we think? I know Benson here, he started this rigorous campaign of sanctions must stop, sanctions are death, and how best we can begin to have conversations around us as African people, particularly Zimbabwe, because we are a case study here of the Southern African states. We are in sanctions right now. We cannot trade, we cannot buy, and our country no longer has currency. We are one of the 88 minerals that are being sought for in the world. Zimbabwe actually can claim we have 67, if not 72 of those minerals. But we don't even have a currency of our own. Sanctions are sitting on us because the Western governments want our governments to collapse, whether it is Chamisa, whether it is Mnangagwa, whether it's we can even resurrect Tsvangirai from the dead.
Well, the fact that Tsvangirai died in a South African hospital, and yet he was the one calling for sanctions in Zimbabwe, tells you just how ironic these sanctions are. They are not destroying just the common man in Zimbabwe. They are destroying all Zimbabweans, including the ones calling for those sanctions.
I want us maybe...
And so now the solution...
No, before we go to the solution. We just saw a message the other day, I think yesterday or today, this morning. One of the chiefs in Tabazinduna, Chief Ndiweni, decided to go on the public media and they say, "Aluta continua.
Let's have more
sanctions and kill this government." But is this man aware that when these sanctions are put into the country, they're actually affecting the people that he is leading and he is guiding? And if they are to be implemented, does he stand to benefit?
Don't forget that chiefs like this chief in Tabazinduna were there when roads came into Zimbabwe to colonize. There were chiefs who collaborated with Rhodes. There were people who collaborated with Rhodes so that Rhodes could help them to attack the Ndebeles. There was always this perception that the white man is going to help us achieve our own interests, only for them to defeat their foe and then become weaker and then be defeated themselves and then become slaves of the very same system.
What's your comment?
Those chiefs lost their land.
What's your comment on the colonized and the type of colonial statements coming out from some? Because I'm honestly speaking, there are some Zimbabweans out there, particularly our class of people. I'm saying so in a collective way. First degree holders, some of us who've just graduated, because our ambitions are actually to take over the system, take over the business, take over the industry, so we can become the new colonizers. And when you begin to talk about the progress of African countries, some of our own brothers are actually champions of trying to destroy local governments
for their own benefit.
Because
allegedly.
Yes, because they think that when you destroy and you remove Mnangagwa from power,
then they have a chance.
And you put whoever you want to put into power, You can have an access. You remove Jacob Zuma and you put Ramaphosa, or you remove Ramaphosa, put Malema inside, remove Kabila. There's this perception of this educated community that actually is ambitious to become the new colonizers. And any opportunity to remove the status quo, they actually in our heads think it's our opportunity. The book that I read in Kenya, our chance to eat.
My problem with people like that is we call them educated, yet they're not educated. Because if they're educated, there's history to tell us that that's not how it works. There's history from the time that slavery began. Black men, black chiefs, black kings were catching other black men, selling them to the European, thinking that they're going to eat. And they did it long enough before.
Slave trade was actually
yes
beneficiary,
but it weakened
to
all
African
of us.
kings.
It weakened all of us. And those African kings stopped being kings, and a lot of them were killed, a lot of them were eliminated, and a lot of them became chiefs, and some of them were removed for new chiefs to be put in that didn't even come from royal
playing the
bloodlines.
game.
We're playing the game.
On that one, of course, I think I'm going to do another program on another day to actually reinvestigate the issue of African kings and African chiefs and etc. Some of the people right now are calling kings and chiefs in our own kingdom, particularly in Zimbabwe, for example. Chief Mang Mang, Chief Mama, I don't mention names. They are not chiefs at all. They're just lapdogs of the colonialists. Sisi John Rhodes butchered the real chiefs. And the real bloodlines. They had to change even their names for security.
And this is why it is critically important for those who think that they can set themselves up for a better thing to understand that that's not what happens. History has shown us that. You get weakened, you get destroyed, you all get enslaved, and then one or two of you will be taken and you'll be made monitors, class monitors.
Yeah, my prefect to high school.
And those
water.
but remember, the prefects never live in any better conditions
except
than the rest.
I want to give you the last few minutes that we have. I want us to move over into solutions. How can we as Africa in a collective sense begin to have conversations in alleviating each other? I'm thinking wildly. How can we create our own sub-economies? Have our own sub-agreements amongst ourselves, to begin to do trade amongst ourselves, to maintain and sustain our own economic leverage, so that even in the event that you are sanctioned, how can you survive sanctions without necessarily having a country like Zimbabwe come to a total standstill? How can Botswana, how can Zambia, how can Lesotho, how can Kenya and Congo and Rwanda begin to, because African Union, as I'm thinking about it, we needed a policy in the midst of that conversation, that is in the event that one of us is being crippled by the West in line of sanctions. How can we begin to respond as neighboring countries, as SADC, as AU, to respond to the concept of sanctions by, we can put them on sanctions, but please, food please, and medicine. The basic things that even in the midst of cruelty, you cannot say you're putting on sanctions because you want to see 15, 16 million people dying because of hunger.
The very first thing we need to do, like I've said, and we started this institution, is to unite as a people. Now, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for us as Africans to call Africa to unite when as countries we're not even united. We're not even united in our own defense. We're not united in our own economic progress. And that's why we said, let's start by Zimbabweans uniting. Zimbabweans must unite. Zimbabweans must unite in the defense of their country. Zimbabweans must unite in terms of collaborating financially, economically, and in terms of prospering themselves. Zimbabweans must unite to come up with a solution to be able to fight this warfare that's in their country. That's the very first thing we need to do. Once we have united, we need to collect each and every person's little bit of money and consolidate it into a kitty, that we are able to start creating our own investment. Right now, Zimbabweans within the past 17 years have been sending to Zimbabwe on average $2 billion. $2 billion into the Zimbabwean economy from the diaspora. That is more investment than even what is coming into South Africa from outside. So we've got our own foreign direct investment that's being generated by the people that are in the diaspora, but it's not being channeled to producing. It's not being channeled to sorting out the problems.
For paying rent.
Yes. And we're sending iPhones, we're sending sneakers, we're sending cars, we're sending things that have no production. And then we wonder why we're remaining in our poverty. Yet if that money was sent into Zimbabwe to control our resources. Do you know that we've got some of the biggest coal reserves in the world?
Yes, sir.
We're not mining it.
Platinum,
Platinum,
gold,
chrome, tin, 86%.
lithium. Talk about cell phones. What are we running on right now?
Now, my question is, why have we not tried to monetize the control of those resources, processing of those resources, and even the sophistication of those resources before we take them overseas?
I want to make a recommendation to everyone who is listening out there. If you have access to governments, you have access to powers that be, I think I'm ready. I'm ready to have some conversation with military generals and political generals. And I think we have some solutions here that we need to start talking. Because there's no way we can have so much resource, so much reserve, and yet we are complaining of sanctions.
And so much savings.
In diaspora.
We've got money.
Which we cannot consolidate.
We've got money. Take $100 per person of 3 million people in the diaspora, middle class. And then put that together.
I was there.
Like I
was
told
sending $200-300 a month to support my family.
So I told you that we have sent $2 billion on average every year for the past 17 years while we were under sanctions. How much is that? That's $38 billion. What have we done with it?
That's enough to build infrastructure.
We don't need foreign investment.
And when the money comes into the country, it is going back to the same hands that are colonizing us again.
And it's also going back to feed the corruption that we talk about. Because as long as we're not using our money to create a business class that's got capacity, that's got power, we've got no counter to politicians who become kings in the country. So people talk about corruption, but they are the ones that are enabling the corruption by not creating a business class that can counter the political power, because business is what is running a country if it is vibrant.
Corruption has few words. There's corruption, there's a corruptor, there's also a corruptee. You know, that's English now. For some of you guys who went to high school, you can Google those words. A corruptor, corruption, and a corruptee. Now, the corruptor is the one who has the means to corrupt the system. So while we are talking about corruption in the country of Zimbabwe, for example, it's nicer for you to say, we cannot do anything until we deal with corruption. The question is, are the first world countries not corrupt in terms of dealing with our democratic systems in Africa?
And not only that, capitalism itself is about taking resources that belong to the public and putting them into private hands. That is the biggest form of corruption, which is why the sanctions are on us, because Mugabe took land, put it in the hands of the people. He took resources, put them in the hands of the people. Took water resources, put them in the hands of the people, and took labor and put it in the hands of the people, and that does not sit well with the capitalist society in which we live.
My primitive definition says socialism is when the poor get poorer and the rich ones make children. Capitalism is when cows are eating grass in Africa and the milk is being milked in the West. And I think we are beginning to see some interesting developments here in Africa. And for me, it's not just about making noise and ruffling around our social media. It's beginning to have our African people talking literally and understanding the power behind power. There is politics. Yeah. But now what we are discussing here is the politics of politics. What happens behind the political structures that we are struggling with as Africans?
And what is the point of politics? It is about making sure that resources are channeled to the right place.
No, in Africa, who's right? Say to the European right place.
Right.
Because so when you say the right place, the right place is the people in Shisharane, where asbestos is being produced, should benefit from that. The people in Kamativi, where tin is, you walk into Kamativi right now, you find it's a shack.
It's a shack.
You walk into Bikita right now, where lithium, and for me, lithium is the top mineral you need for making
the oil of the future.
It's the oil of the future for making batteries for cell phones and everything else. But you walk into Bikita, there's nothing happening.
And Joshua, as long as we, like I said, we are waiting for a European to put money in our country,
they will not come
and make policies for our countries, they will always take the majority of what they produce. But did you know in Dubai, where there's oil, they charge up to 82% tax and royalties on the oil companies. Why are we not doing the same in Africa?
Let me make a very serious recommendation here. People in Zimbabwe, when you support sanctions, you're actually destroying your own country. You are reducing the quality of the lives of your own family members. You are reducing the quality of life and the health systems of your own country. You are messing up the education of your own country. Now, this is what we are recommending. How about, just as an idea, 18 million people, Zimbabweans. How about we start putting aside $1 per day as Zimbabweans? Put that money in a kitty and begin to deal with the service delivery that we are looking for. We do this not only with government, even outside of government. Because at the end of the day, when I send my mother money at home, that 2,000 rand, 3,000 rand, that money is going back into the same drain, and there's no development totally. And so we need to start having conversations as African peoples. How do we begin to resolve these issues? And we cannot, as Zimbabweans, we cannot, as Africans, be found supporting sanctions. No matter how evil our people are, no matter how corrupt our leaders are, when you institute sanctions on any country, those sanctions will mess up the poor people. I'm telling you right now, Mugabe's life does not change because there are sanctions.
And not only that, what we've also been trying to say to the people is that as long as we've got sanctions that are dividing families and people have to run as refugees out of the country, we're also dividing our families. We're also dividing the nation. The morality of the nation, this notion that our women have to become prostitutes to sustain themselves, is a destruction of the moral fiber of our nation. So we need to work on that. So we are saying people don't understand about sanctions. So we've decided to sell T-shirts. To sell T-shirts, you get a good quality T-shirt, and we take that bit of profit that we make, that 30 rand that we make, we put it aside so that we can begin to go on the ground, road shows, to teach people about these sanctions. But not only do we want to do road shows, if we go to a school in the rural areas where we are presenting to people what sanctions are all about, we also want to be able to contribute to developing that school. To that we such a gayo at a school so that people can begin to grind milli meal for the community. The school makes money, it can be able to subsidize itself. We want to start teaching each other the strategies of collective investment to be able to beat these sanctions by uniting in mind, uniting in spirit, uniting in materialism and skill, so that we can beat these sanctions. Because we can beat these sanctions if we control our resources and pull our monies together, work together, love each other. We can beat these sanctions.
I know Mr. Ralph Black, all the way from United States of America, my old friend there. We were together in college, and I know he's a strong and staunch supporter of MDC. Welcome one, welcome all. This is your show.
And we need these Americans.
Yeah, he's in America. And he's writing, how can you put aside $1 per day when the people are living on less than $1 per day?
No, my brother. In Zimbabwe, you'll be surprised that some of our villages have more money than us sitting in the cities, because they actually grow their own food, they sell it, and they've got that $1. It's how it is being utilized that matters. If we start to leverage that $1, we can teach our people how to make wealth and how to actually prosper.
And to support on that also, Zimbabwe has the highest literacy rate in the world. And my mother told me, meaning please go to school so that you will not pick papers on the road. There's no way, Ralph Black, you can talk about the $1 per day. 90% of the country, 90% of the audience, 90% of the populace in Zimbabwe can read and write. Having that as our economic bargaining power. We have children. I'm here. My sister was in London. You are there in Britain. Your father is still in Zimbabwe. We are all scattered around. We are saying let's use and reinvest our monies and resources back into a country. We still don't have, of course, the institution which you can say we've put together to drive this agenda. But for an onset, we are thinking that as a response to the sanctions. Look how Japan came out of those sanctions, out of Hiroshima. Look how China has come out of those sanctions. Look how Russia has come out of those sanctions. Look at other countries as case studies, so that we don't have to sit here as Zimbabweans and say, well, Americans have put us on sanctions, let's just remove Mnangagwa and put Chamisa in power. I want to guarantee you, even if tomorrow morning we can remove Mnangagwa and put Chamisa in power or Kupe in power, if Kupe touches the issue of land, he or she also will be in sanctions. You need to understand that. Ramaphosa here in South Africa, in as much as we think that let Ramaphosa institute land collection without compensation, South Africa will be on sanctions the following morning. And I think the African people need to start waking up from sleep. That it's not just a political gimmick of sanctions. The issue is that Western countries want to run African governments, and the way to do it is to squeeze in their economic power so that you can institute political bullying.
And it's very important for me to say something that a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people believe that Japan is a very successful country because of liberating itself. Japan is not a liberated country. Japan has got 55,000 American soldiers, U.S. bases on the ground in Japan. So it's a colony. It's a colony.
To manage.
There is no doubt that it's a colony. But the difference between Japan and Africa is this. Japan has no resources, but it has got labor. So Japan was colonized for its skilled labor. So that they can produce products using African resources that will be sold into a 4.5 billion people Asian market. So their level of oppression
China and North Korea.
And their level of oppression is different to the level of oppression in Africa. Africa will never be let to get educated, to be skilled, or to have the capacity to have industry, because you are the source of the raw material that gives jobs to the Americans, that gives jobs to the Germans, that gives jobs to the Europeans. If you want to liberate yourself from that, stop asking for permission. Take control of your resources. After taking control of your resources, unite. Collect the little that you get, create a market for your resources, and begin to make money to industrialize yourself. But don't compare yourself with Japan, because Japan has no resources.
Well, we can talk and we can share, and I'm so excited this afternoon on this afternoon drive where we've been having conversations around the sanctions in Zimbabwe, and sanctions must stop. The American government has put Zimbabwe on sanctions, but unfortunately their embassy is still in the country. How do you put a country on sanctions and yet you keep your embassy there?
$300 million spent on building an embassy in Zimbabwe.
Yes, but you want the country is in sanctions.
No, but it makes sense why the country is in sanctions.
You man manager.
Because they are putting up an empire that they want to control. But these people that they want to control are smart. These people that they want to control have intelligence. These people they want to control the resources. So what do? You must weaken those people before you can dominate and before you can begin. I
want to call for a revolution to all the people in diaspora. Start making noise. Sanctions are killing your own mothers, your own fathers, and your own sisters and brothers back home. Not only that, we need to start making demonstrations in all the American embassies around the world, wherever the African people are, that when you injure one of us, you're injuring all of us. And ultimately, as Africans, we need to start putting our resources together into one collective pocket where we can begin to respond to these African sanctions. And ultimately, the African governments need to have a collective conversation as to how best can we begin to curb, I'm speaking English today, curb these sanctions and begin to build the economy of Africa by inter-trading amongst ourselves. I mean, for a few minutes, just in closing, and I think you can give us some closing remarks as to what you think will be in closing. What is your,
I think,
in last few punchlines as to?
I think I'm going to say that we have to build the message of unity. And I acknowledge that many people do not accept what we're saying about sanctions here. So we have, those ones of us who understand these sanctions have to educate. And the way we're going to be able to educate is we need resources to make this happen. This means that for me to leave my business, for him to leave his business, and we have time to actually go on the road to educate people, we need material support.
Yes.
And we're not going to ask for donations.
No.
We are selling these t-shirts.
Okay.
We will have something of value.
Let me sell for you. Okay, guys, what we want to do is that we want to sell at least not less than 1 million of these t-shirts. We want to raise not less than 450 million plus out of selling of these t-shirts, Zimbabwe, sanctions, and etc. And I think most of us Zimbabweans, I've already bought 6 of them for myself. Put this money in a kitty and begin to do projects that will begin to affect and influence and impact the development of our own economy. And with me here,
and let me tell them, the money is not going to make me rich. It's not going to make him rich. We're going to use that money to actually do road shows. We need road shows in the villages. We need road shows in the townships. We need road shows in the suburbs. We need road shows outside Zimbabwe to bring our people together, to bring Africans together. And then we also need to be able to give to projects that we kickstart in communities.
All right.
To start.
Okay. I'll put the details for Mr. Benson at the bottom of this conversation. Please support this project. I am in. And let's give the man a chance also to do the initiative that he said he will do. And when you see a man who wants to develop a country, I think it all belongs to us. You're still going to be paying your Gucci's and your Vicenzos, buying your your money and other things, you may as well spend that money in terms of buying products that can assist in developing the Zimbabwe economy. Here is your afternoon driver, Maphonga J, on your afternoon drive, and our guest for today was Mr. Benson Matinyarare. Put some hearts there, and let's all send some greetings until we meet again tomorrow, same time. And Ralph Black, yes, my brother Ralph, buy some t-shirts and give us some money while you're in America there in Texas. Let's develop this economy. You are making noise in America there. Come back here. If you can't come here, send some money and support us. Until we meet again tomorrow afternoon, same time. Maphonga J. Have a good afternoon. Love you all.